Welcome to the Hidden Figures podcast, Behind the Numbers with the Restaurant Scientist. Within this podcast, we take an in-depth look into the economics of the food service and restaurant industry. The show will examine the economic disparities and inequalities impacting Black food service professionals and restaurateurs. We will support and empower Black food service professionals and restaurateurs by providing opportunities for increased visibility, access to capital, and problem-solving expertise. Yes. What it is, what it is, what it is. What it is, what it was, and what it shall be. My name is Jason Wallace. I am the Restaurant Scientist, and welcome to Hidden Figures podcast, Behind the Numbers with the Restaurant Scientist. Today's guest is personal, it's emotional. I know everyone is familiar with the legendary Sylvia's restaurant in the village of Harlem NYC. Just celebrated the 60th anniversary of this magnificent brand and family. You're talking about 4, 5, 6 generations of Woods family members. And today I'm honored to have as my guest the CEO of SWI, Sylvia Woods Restaurant, Inc., Sean Woods. What's happening, Sean?
Thank you, my brother.
My man, my man, my man. Welcome to the show.
Appreciate it.
So, I see some hardware behind you there, Sean. I see that. What's that on that wall back there? Talk to me about that.
That's my undergrad degree. It's been a while now. It makes me feel old, but I graduated from Cornell University 2009. You know, on the bottom there, that's my shingle for my fraternity, Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated.
Okay. All right. So he said Cornell. He said undergrad. So what that mean is there's also a graduate degree somewhere out there. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. I know you're familiar with your Pittsburgh roots. But yeah, I attended Carnegie Mellon University, the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy. I graduated from there in 2012.
Nice. So from Cornell to Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, huge accolades. Much respect to you for that. So let's talk a little bit about your professional journey, right? How did you get to becoming the CEO of SWI, and who were your mentors and who are your mentors currently?
Okay, well, I took an interesting road to returning back to my family. As most know, if anybody's interacted with the restaurant or seen my family, we all pretty much grew up inside the restaurant. And not saying we were free labor, but it's just a rite of passage. You know, you washing dishes, busting tables, just because, you know, nobody's paying for babysitters. If you need to be somewhere, whether it be after school or on the weekend, you're in the restaurant. And it was all hands on deck. That's when my grandparents were still around. Mm-hmm. You know, my grandmother, you know, a lot longer than my grandfather because he passed away a little bit earlier. But so my roots have always been in Sylvia's. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's home. Outside of probably school, I probably spent the most time in the restaurant, mm-hmm. which is not just unique to me. That's as I said, that's my entire family. But in terms of my career path, I will be honest, I had zero intentions of being in the industry at all. Mm-hmm. I've always loved the restaurant, but I always said, and this is something I probably realized at 14, 15, maybe it's because the type of work that it was, because everybody knows restaurants is tough. My grandmother, you have to love it. And she loved this restaurant. She made it very clear that this restaurant was her first baby, mm-hmm. you know? Mm-hmm. So the type of time and energy and the amount of people required, I just didn't think that was for me. But it taught me a lot in terms of watching hard work and, mm-hmm. and seeing, you know, the types of results that could create, especially if you love something. So I think I was more so focused on finding something that I loved, where I could put in that work and get that return. Because my grandmother, she was happy just to see people happy. Right. So that was the return she got. It was more than financial. She was really grateful that people would enjoy the experience at her restaurant.
Gotcha.
But so undergrad, I knew I wanted to be in business because I like transactional I like anything transactional for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I like people. So I was trying to find a happy medium. I thought maybe I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought about politics. My first job outside of the restaurant was working for Congressman Rangel right here at the state office building around the corner. So I
Mm-hmm.
was somewhere in that space, business, policy, law,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere. So in undergrad, I decided to study industrial and labor relations with the focus in collective bargaining.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I guess I'll loop it back around because there are things that still connect in terms of the restaurant hospitality business as I made my return.
Right.
But and then in grad school, well, I entered through a fellowship program called Coral. It was a fellowship program in public affairs, which gave this basically a rotational opportunity in business, nonprofits, and government.
Mm-hmm.
So I did like an assessment at a courthouse, and then I worked for a startup, and then I was at a small nonprofit for a housing development in Pittsburgh on the Hill.
Okay.
And I honestly did that in hindsight. I was just trying to buy time because after graduating from college, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. So I
Mm-hmm.
was still seeking out opportunities that would give me glimpses into different sectors and try to narrow my focus. And that's what kind of led to me going into a school of information systems and public policy because still like the the lingering thing in the back of my mind was I guess the synergies between business, government, and nonprofit. So I wanted to be somewhere in between all these sectors. So I ended up taking on an internship as an analyst at IBM
Mm-hmm.
while I was at CMU, and I ended up becoming yeah, at that point I thought I might have been an IBM lifer at that point because I was in corporate headquarters and they gave me the opportunity to travel.
Mm-hmm.
When I was studying abroad in Australia, they still allowed me to work there. So I ended up taking on a full-time job role, and they selected me to be in one of the leadership development programs. So with that, I was, government programs. I was a policy analyst, data privacy analyst was my last role.
Mm-hmm.
There, I had a tremendous opportunity just because of my experience at corporate headquarters in Armonk, a little bit further upstate in New York and Westchester. I got to work for, and God rest his soul, he passed away a few years ago, Ron Glover, who was a vice president at IBM and one of the few Black faces you would see just in corporate headquarters in the company in general, especially in a leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, like, from a work perspective, that was my first real mentor. And thankfully, he was my direct manager. So, I got to be, uh, three people removed from the CEO of the company, which is really,
Wow.
really uncommon.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that Ron was really intentional about giving me visibility,
Mm-hmm.
putting me on projects I probably wasn't even prepared for.
Mm-hmm.
He just looked out for me. He believed in me. And I was like tremendously blessed because it was a high amount of pressure that I was put under. But I think that even looking at my peers, like my cohort who came into the company at the same time for my internship class and then my hiring class, nobody got more visibility than I did.
Wow.
Nobody was honestly able to, the insights that I got from being on certain teams, like one in particular is called INVT, Innovation and Value Teams, where it's a CEO, the CEO chooses 27 senior executives. So at IBM, it's you have your CEO, then you have, like maybe like 10 senior vice presidents, then you have general managers of geographies.
Mm-hmm.
So the then CEO, Ginny Rometty, INVT 10, that's the one I was a part of. There's 27 leaders. So the most senior leaders in this company of at that point, 400,000 people. I was able to work on that project for almost a year as it's almost like an intern, like an executive assistant to the team.
Right.
And it just changed my life because I got to see how a company that large, I had an idea just because I was working for a vice president, but no, it's like I got to actually see how these corporations run from a high level. And it was
Right.
amazing. It was amazing. That actually led to the inception of the new business unit, which is colloquial, well, it was known as Watson back then, but now it's like a full on like AI business unit, Watson. There's a whole bunch of commercials you'll see. So
Wow.
I only reference that because if it wasn't for Ron, there's no way I would have been selected
Right.
to be on those teams, because some of the people who were like my peers out of the, I think it was 7 or 8 of us who were the support consultants, all of them were pretty senior, you
Right.
know.
Right.
Yeah, they were on leadership development tracks, but they were far ahead of me, you
Right.
know. So I was by far the youngest, by far the least experienced, and I basically got a crash course in how a large corporation makes decisions. You know,
Right. Right.
some
Which is huge.
super cutthroat, others,
Mm.
you know, more straightforward. But watching like a whole company just pivot in a very volatile time was life changing.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, that's all connected to, you know, into who my mentor was, is definitely Ron Glover, 100%. He looked out for
Right.
young kid from New York. He's from Boston. I think he saw some similarities in me.
Right.
So yeah,
No,
that
that's
was
huge.
my,
That's
yeah,
priceless. Like, you know, like you say, seeing a company of that size, that magnitude, that much power, up close and personal like that is definitely priceless.
yeah,
You know, you can't get that sitting in the classroom, no matter what school
no,
you go to,
at
and
all.
you can't get it reading magazines or watching the news or any of that. So then you brought all of that to SWI. How was it? What was that like? Like, how did you
That
make the
train.
decision, or what were some of the influences that, you know, said, okay, let me come back home, right, into the family business and incorporate myself into that culture?
Well, that was somewhat out of left field, but I'll use the word hindsight a lot, because as I reflect on things, I'm like, well, maybe I kind of knew in the back of my mind that I was eventually gonna be associated with the family business in some capacity. But
Mm-hmm.
I was, my last assignment at IBM, I was in London. That's when I was doing data privacy. So I was like supporting 27 countries in terms of just cross-border data privacy sharing for government programs. And
Mm-hmm.
I was at an interesting point in my career, because at that point I pretty much was 5 years in, and I was graduating from my leadership development program. So after that, usually you either take on a director track or VP track role in the company, and you know they'll tell you a geography that needs assistance. And
Mm-hmm.
just like I got shipped off to London, I was probably going to get shipped off somewhere else, or
Mm-hmm.
end up staying there, or I would leave the company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was IBM was going through a lot. Just as I said, with the that project I worked on, the company was pivoting from, you know, being super hardware, software focused, into like software as a service. So I was trying to figure out what would be the most strategic route for me. One, for like career development. At that point, my manager had retired, so I had support. Obed Lusant was another mentor of mine, and he's another Cornell grad, a little bit older than me, but he was looking out for me. I did have support, but I started to seek out other opportunities. And I always have in the back of my mind, like, I don't necessarily always write down 5 year plans, but I think 5 years at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, if I stay at IBM, how many years would it take me to become vice president?
Right.
If I got a job offer from Facebook in data privacy, and that was going to be in Dublin, Ireland. It was a pay bump too, and they were going to allow me to still live in London, and travel to Dublin, let's say, you know, a week out of every month. So I was like, okay, if I leave, then I'm gonna have to start from scratch. I'll be candid. I was still dealing with the dynamics of being the only Black person, you
Mm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Seldom would I ever have a teammate who was Black, you know.
Right.
Again, I didn't have my manager anymore. I'm used to being in environments where, you know, the minority,
Right.
just because my, you know, schooling experience. But
Right.
not saying it was only like the ethnicity, but just being younger in a very old company. I just wanted to make a change, but I knew whatever I did, I needed to give myself 5 years to give myself a reasonable chance to succeed. It's gonna take me 2 years just kind of figure out what I'm doing, because I remember how it was starting my job.
Right.
So all during this period, I was still helping out my dad from just a son and father perspective. I would ask him send me the balance sheet, send me the P&Ls. When I have time, we'll have
So just let me
conversations.
just give some context there. So
Right.
your dad, Kenneth Woods, was the
Yeah.
previous CEO before
Yes.
you
Yeah.
you took over. All right, go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, my dad been the CEO of the business for over 30 years at that point.
Mm-hmm.
This is back in 20. This is like 2015, 2016 when we're really having these detailed conversations. I'm giving my perspective
Mm-hmm.
as a family member.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'm not neutral, but I'm neutral from the perspective like I don't rely on y'all for a paycheck. So if
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying anything to the family, it's solely out of care for the business and
Right.
care for my father, obviously.
Right.
So I appreciated having the ability to assist, but it was very difficult for me to assist fully without fully ingraining myself in the restaurant. So I noticed in the conversations, I'm like, damn, hey, can I really help
Right.
y'all from an external position?
Right.
And at that point, that's when I started to, I'm having conversations with friends, just kind of playing in the atmosphere, like, what do y'all think? And I'm trying to figure out like what my dad's gonna do. He's getting up there in age. I'm looking around like who's about to, not just take the reins, but who's gonna try and take this business into a next generation. Like there's a whole my grandmother, my grandparents to her 4 children now. I got a whole bunch of first cousins. It's just a different dynamic, and
Right.
there wasn't necessarily any plan. But I wasn't trying to fully ingratiate myself either for a lot of different reasons.
Right.
One, I'm not the biggest fan of working with family, and then secondly, I'll be honest, like I used to say, y'all can't pay me,
Right.
So
Right.
those things were in the back of my mind, and I remember we started to have conversations. I'm asking dad what his plans are, and you can have the conversation with him on a sidebar, but I think he was really stuck between a rock and a hard place because he wanted me to come back
Yeah.
because it had been alluded to a few times, but he didn't want me to take a break from, he didn't want to throw me off my trajectory, whatever path I was on.
Right.
So, Easter 2016, my parents came out to visit me in London, and we went to Rome for Easter, which was an amazing experience. I took them to Rome,
Mm-hmm.
and we spent a few days out there, and that's when he pretty much asked me, like, what are my plans? And I, told him about the offer I had from Facebook, and I told him about some of the reservations I was having from a timing perspective. But
Right.
that's the first time I was really candid with him about I'll be positive, but I had some worries about the future of the business.
Right.
Not because people didn't know what they were doing, but just because, as you know, and I felt the same way at IBM, I felt the same way within my personal career. I'm a huge believer, if you're not growing, you're dying.
You're right.
And to stay stagnant in an industry that's forever changing,
Yep.
in an environment like Manhattan, Harlem, like I felt there was a level of stagnation in the business, which would be okay for now, but I knew it was going to be problematic moving forward. And I felt like the stagnation had a lot to do with the dynamics of running a family business,
Right.
age, and
Yep.
and just basically a lack of a plan in terms of what the next steps were. So he asked me to come back. There was a lot of back and forth. I was trying to figure out how to facilitate that financially.
Right.
There was a lot of people opposed to it in my personal life, family,
Okay.
my own mom disagreed greatly with me leaving my job or, taking a step back and
Right.
coming back to the family. I had my reservations,
Right.
but I knew that if I was going to do it, it would have to be then. Because I was like, I wait some more time, then honestly, I won't be able to afford to take
Right.
a real cut, So
Right.
then I'm, single and I don't have kids, so I was like, I do have the flexibility to sacrifice, and then also, again, in hindsight, I think that I really did want to embark on something that was personal to me.
Right.
And, maybe I discounted it back then because I was just so focused on myself. But I
Right.
truly love this business, and I truly love my grandmother, obviously,
Right.
and the legacy. I appreciate what this means to Harlem, what it means to us as our culture.
Right.
And then also, I'm a huge believer in the business being able to grow exponentially.
Right.
And I'm like, who better than, a family member? And then also I was like, let me try to find a non-family member to be able to do this, but I know how my family is. You interacted with them. I was
Yeah,
like, it
yeah.
would be almost impossible I find extreme difficulties in doing it myself. As somebody born and raised in this restaurant with
Right.
experience, with external knowledge and all that, I find it extremely difficult. So to ask somebody else to do it, I just don't know if it will be even possible. So
Right.
either way, nobody forced me. I made that decision. I took a leave of absence. I asked my then manager for 3 months. I'm trying to explain to them like, yeah, my family has a restaurant, and I don't think they understood that it was a large restaurant. So
Yeah,
they're like,
they didn't
oh
understand
well,
the magnitude, right?
yeah. And they're like, well, just gotta. They're thinking I'm just gonna hop in the restaurant and be helping plate some food, and then
Right.
after 3 months,
Right.
hire a few people, and then I'll come back to work. But
Right.
obviously, that leave of absence, I wasn't being disingenuous. I did give myself a cushion. But after the few months, it became permanent, and I became vice president of SWI, and that's all she wrote. I
Nice.
fully did. Yeah, I went all in for the most part into the family business.
Nice. Wow. Yeah, I
Yeah,
can imagine there's definitely like there's mixed emotions because clearly,
yeah,
I have a close relationship with with you and your family. So I was also privy to some of that inside information, and so the challenge is. Are coming from multiple angles. One, you're talking about a culture that's been around now for 60 years, and at that point, it was probably around 55 years that you kind of inherited it.
yeah,
Then there's that culture between you being a young man and then growing into a man, and now having grown man conversations with your father. Right? I know what that feels like because my sons as well. Like they're grown now. So, and
yeah,
now we're talking about business, and then there's the difference in personality, right? There's a difference in style of leadership. There's a difference in education, and all of those things I'm sure played into your decision and your apprehension on and probably even on both sides.
yeah,
But I know the family bond is a strong draw, but I guess there's also in your eyes it's like okay, there's a challenge here too that
yeah.
is, you can't really quantify in terms of dollars. That there's a challenge, there's legacy, and those things I'm sure weighed heavy on your decision.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. It's you think about it from an external perspective, and I see like the stresses and the burden of running a family-owned business because especially as you said, like we're actually a tight-knit family. It'd be different if it's like, yeah, see you when I see you type thing,
Right.
or if I just have a whole bunch of distant relatives. But my cousins, we grew up like siblings, and everybody has personal attachments to the place. So I really did try to reflect on one, watching how my grandmother operated, how my dad operates and operated, and then how I would be able to operate in the same setting because I could have all these scenarios in my head. Well, you did it like this. Well, from my perspective, you should have done it like this, or I would have done it like this. But not until you're really in it do you realize
Yes.
just how many of those conversations you're having on a regular basis and what types of conversations you're having.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought about it, but I'll be honest. I think I was a bit naive.
Yeah.
I was. Yeah,
Yeah.
I knew that there would be some difficulties, but I may have underestimated the closeness of the family, and I may have overestimated my ability to like disassociate things
Yeah.
and
Emotionally.
compartmentalize. Because I'm coming from an environment where decisions are just made because it's a simple conversation,
Right.
even though it might be contentious. But
Right.
what's best for the business? What impacts the bottom line?
Right.
What does this mean 6 months from now, a year from now?
Right.
And I didn't realize a lot of those they were super cutthroat. If I had put family in those conversations, we might have been stuck at that same table,
Yeah.
for weeks for a conversation that may have taken, 30 seconds with non-family members. So yeah, I think I was a bit naive.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to get used to it. It's something I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah.
But again, there's how many books and are written about family businesses, about how many case studies, you can spend thousands, unlimited amount of hours
Yep.
reading because there's a lot of work done on it because it is complicated.
Yeah.
But again, I'm like, I'll figure this out. Boom, boom, boom. It's gonna happen.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely got humbled in terms of when I talked about timelines. I said, 5 years, I'll be able to do this. Yeah, that timeline got stretched out a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And let me, for those that may not understand the magnitude of Sylvia's and the impact that it has had on not only just the community, but the family, and more importantly, how close this family is. And I'm talking from a front row seat. I don't know any other family that is really this close, and they party together. They work together. They leisure together. Like, they do everything together. When they go on vacation, they go on vacation together. So and to Sean's point is that now if I'm in a corporate environment and I'm coming from like you say, a cutthroat kind of environment, this is going to directly impact my sister, my cousins. You know what I mean? Like my auntie, my uncle. My dad. So it's definitely. I could see how you could be naive going into that situation because that culture is very unique and challenging to make those kinds of decisions, and they're big decisions. And as you don't want to be that person as I'm at the helm of this ship. That you are the one that's driving the ship towards dry land. And run aground or something to that nature. Let's just clarify again. Let me just clarify for the people out there. You have two companies, right? You have two brands. You have a product line and then you have a restaurant. Is that correct?
Yeah. So SWI is comprised of Sylvia Woods Food Company, which is the packaged goods that you're referencing in grocery stores nationwide.
How many products
Sylvia's
you have
restaurant.
now?
We have 17 SKUs right now.
17 SKUs.
Yeah. So that company was started, like my Uncle Van, he had this dream. He's like, nah, Mom, your face needs to be on products in these grocery stores. And they started that company around 2001. Mm-hmm. I think that's when the company became nationally distributed. There were some products sold directly at the restaurant before then, but
right.
Yeah. So you have Sylvia's Food Company, and then obviously the restaurant that was started August 1st, 1962.
Okay, so now people think that Sylvia's was sold to someone. Who actually owns it? So there's two brands. You got a product line, SWI, and then you got the restaurant. Who actually owns both of those companies?
So Sylvia Woods Incorporated is owned entirely by the Woods family, 100%. I've had people tell me that I've heard that when I was a kid, I heard when it was Chinese people, then Koreans, I heard Jewish.
Right.
It's actually really odd. I've heard stories about how the rumor started. I think it had to do with like the large tour buses that were coming, and somebody just kind of ran with it. Some of them, are really extreme. I've seen people be adamant with me, like, no, I talked to the owner, it's an Asian person. I'm like, who is this mysterious person? I've never even, hey.
Right. Let's put that to rest. Let's put this to bed right now. Sylvia Woods Restaurant and product line, 100% owned and operated by the entire Woods family, or the executive. So good.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Wholly owned. We do have a manufacturing partnership with the Sylvia Woods Food brand.
Okay.
Out of Jersey, but it's a small group of people who help us distribute our products. But for the restaurant, my grandmother is very adamant about maintaining whole ownership, 100%. Like no. And then also thankfully they had the foresight to purchase the property that the restaurant sits on. So basically the block between Malcolm X Boulevard, Lenox Ave, between 126th and 127th is 100% owned by the family as well.
So let's wait. Yeah. So you're talking about ownership of, one, black real estate owners on the island of Manhattan, in the village of Harlem, from 126th Street to damn near 127th Street.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So you're talking about multiple properties, correct?
Yes.
All right, so I just want to put that out so people understand that you're not only a restaurateur, which actually complicates the executive decisions that a CEO has to make, because not only are you the landlord, you're also the tenant. So
Yep.
now, do you charge yourself market rates that are going in Harlem at, $90 a square foot on Lenox and 125th Street, which is the Times Square of Harlem? Or do you give yourself a sweetheart lease as a restaurateur? So I'm sure that added to not only just your father's decision, complicated his decision making, I'm sure that's probably going to be part of your challenges as well as the CEO going forward. Would you
Yeah,
agree?
some differences of opinion on how to handle that. But yeah, it's not we'll say it's not a bad problem to have.
Mm-hmm.
So shouts to them for buying this property,
Mm-hmm.
because my life would be inextricably more difficult. I don't even know if I'll be here right now. So yeah,
Right.
so good problem to have. So they
Absolutely.
yeah, they were ahead of their time with that one.
No, absolutely. So let's compare and contrast the brands pre-COVID and post-COVID. Meaning, the product, how many SKUs did you have before COVID? What has changed and pivoted the decision making and the number of products that are being sold in the states the number of states that they're being sold. And then on the restaurant side, let's speak to, weekly customers. Now, again, for those of you that know me, I'm a restaurant consultant, and Sylvia's is one of my clients, and I've been working in the restaurant industry 35 years. I've never worked in a restaurant as busy as Sylvia's. Like, you don't even understand how busy this place is when it's at its peak, and you got people waiting an hour and a half to get in, and every dining room is full, and a bus might pull up with 40 people saying, okay, can we just get some takeout, right? Can we just order from the counter and eat on the bus? So compare and contrast those two businesses pre-COVID and now as you are the CEO.
I'll start with the restaurant, because it's well documented how the restaurant industry had to navigate through COVID. It was rough. I will be honest. We had 117 employees going into COVID.
117 employees.
117 employees. So we were the largest Black-owned employer in Harlem. One of the largest Black-owned ones in the city. Yeah, and
Yep.
we had to honestly scale completely back. Things. I mean, we were dealing with the shutdown. Lenox Ave was a ghost town. I'd never seen. It was the most eerie feeling.
Yeah.
During those first months, because if anybody knows Harlem, like Lenox Ave, like you said, 125th is the Times Square of Harlem, and Lenox Ave is like the heartbeat of Harlem. It is.
Absolutely.
You could hear a pin drop, and so we ended up going to just solely takeout and delivery. So obviously scale back operations completely. So you're talking about more than a 50% reduction in staff, more than a 50% reduction across the board. And, customers, we had to narrow our hours. It was a complete pivot. And it was one of those times where us and every restaurant, we were just trying to figure out. It was like week after week, pivot, change, revisit, things of that sort. And thankfully, we already had a pretty strong takeout business. So we were able to streamline pretty quickly and already had a customer base that were, used to doing delivery and takeout. So that definitely was a blessing.
Okay.
That we didn't have to create a whole new revenue center to stay in business. So that was a change, though. It was a tough time because, as you say, the gift and the curse of having all this property. I'm like, bills still got to get paid.
Absolutely.
Con Ed's still knocking. You know,
property
still
taxes.
Paying property taxes. Yeah, it's like everything's still happening. And then you still have a payroll, and it was different. It was unique to us. It was unique to I believe every restaurant. So it was a time where we navigated. We could go into detail later on in terms of some of the changes we were able to make inside overall, because there were some good things that came out of it.
Right.
But I will say interesting and one of the things I've been extremely vocal about in terms of diversifying revenue, and one of the reasons I moved back to New York and came into the family business, because this reliance as a large family on, regardless of how large this restaurant is, it can't be the only thing generating revenue, you know?
Right.
And the food company on that side, I was actually in the midst of scaling back like 6 SKUs. I wanted to exit canned goods completely.
Okay.
I was actually, I started that process in January. It was like January 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And just 86ing a huge chunk of the product line because of cost increases,
Mm-hmm.
quality control.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of messy. And then also canned goods wasn't growing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I just basically, it was inevitable, at least at what everybody thought, it was inevitable that part of the portfolio was going to eventually be, you know, let go. And COVID hit, and all of a sudden, canned goods sales start skyrocketing, you
Oh,
know?
wow.
So thankfully, I didn't pull the trigger yet. I was just in the process of basically, we would just have to stop production.
Right.
But immediately, we just had to, you know, make a few phone calls down to Carolina, and just like, no, we actually need to increase production now. And I'm extremely grateful because that actually supplemented a lot of the losses we were taking in the restaurant.
In a restaurant. Got it.
Yeah. So it was interesting, though, you know, the dynamic of it. And that wasn't some like clairvoyancy on my part. Like nobody could have predicted a pandemic,
Right.
especially from a canned good perspective. Of course, like all of a sudden people hoarding canned goods.
Right, right.
You know, but
so we need some luck. Some of us, you know, luck is part of the equation, right?
It is like, you know, and that worked out. But again, it goes back to these are the benefits of having multiple businesses,
Absolutely.
you know, because that give and take, that support where one's suffering, just like any of these companies, whether it be IBM, Microsoft, like you have multiple business units for a reason. Obviously, you know, to enter in different arenas,
Yep.
but at the end of the day, there's ebbs and flows in every industry. So,
Yep.
you know, you somewhat insulate yourself when you diversify. And that's one thing that kind of happened organically, where, you know, where one business was really in a headlock, another one was thriving in a really random way. So,
Right.
yeah, that's how that played out. So
Got you.
I'm thankful.
Got you.
Yeah.
In terms of your organizational chart, now, you know, talk to me through your CEO lenses. Like, you know, what was the organizational chart like before? How do you kind of see it moving forward and making those adjustments so that, you know, we could bring, you know, so for the next 10 years, right? I know you're at 60 years now, and clearly you want to go on for another 60, but I believe that you got to break that down into chunks, you know, smaller pieces of, you know, a decade at a time. So clearly, you know, the environment, the demographics are changing. Your customers are changing in terms of the age, the older population, you know, are retiring and moving on or dying off. And, you know, you got this middle generation of, you know, probably 35 to 55-year-olds. And then you got the younger generation of, you know, 21 to 35-year-olds. So, you know, what's your vision and plan for not only just the organization and your organizational chart, but also for the brand itself and in terms of moving forward with you know, how you kind of envision Sylvia being in, you know, over the next 10 years.
Got it. So when I think about it, the primary focus of the family has been the restaurant, because I feel like that was a natural transition because my grandmother is a chef, starts a restaurant. She, you know, with that transition to the second generation, in terms of my dad, also a chef. They and then also, like you mentioned, the restaurant's extremely busy, and for anybody who's in the industry or closely connected to it, we already know how much time has to be put into just a restaurant alone. So I don't think there was really much time to focus on these other businesses. That's why, you know, the food company was somewhat on autopilot, you know, just kind of floating out there in the atmosphere. And the real estate, like you talked about before, even the conversations about what to prioritize, being that these things affect one another, you know? Do you redevelop the real estate? What does that mean? Do you have to close a restaurant to do it? Can't be out of the marketplace. So all these conversations happening, but at the end of the day, the driver of all these conversations was the restaurant. Prioritize the restaurant, which I don't disagree, and I'm glad they did it, because obviously celebrating 60 years, that's not a small feat at all. especially in a place like this, in an industry like this. So it's a testament to their ability to take care of the restaurant, just take care of business as a whole. But my perspective was always to execute decisions from a high level of ownership perspective, still prioritizing the restaurant because it's the core. It's my grandmother's namesake. It is extremely personal to me. But my focus was always to be able to recreate from an organizational structure perspective where everything was like, all right, restaurant conversation and make decisions outward from there. I wanted to do it from a Sylvia was Incorporated perspective, the restaurant being one of the assets. Again, I'm not going to discount the importance because with family, I have to always remind them, like, wait, we're all on the same page, just understand.
Right.
I'm saying it from a different perspective, but we're saying the same thing. The restaurant will be cared for. The restaurant will never be sold. The restaurant will always be owned by the family. Right. But the restaurant needs to be protected. And the only way to protect it is to focus on these other businesses because they are equally important.
Yeah.
And COVID was a big, and I'm not glad it happened, but I'm glad we were able to have conversations as we navigated through it where I could show them, like, look, this is why this is important.
Right.
This is why these other businesses are extremely important. This is why these businesses need to be prioritized. So, I'm essentially building an organization outside of the restaurant.
Got you.
So elevating the family into ownership. So the involvement, I'm all good with the, boots on the ground, all hands in. Right. Man, I don't care if I got to plunge the toilet. That's just something that got to be done. Let's do it. But my focus is from a high level, making sure that all these businesses are operating accordingly. And for my first few years that I was back in New York, I really only focused on the food company. I was in the restaurant a lot because my office is directly above, but I really only focused on the food company, which I'm glad I did because I was able to learn the business. Right. Which is also a very extremely difficult business, but I took the time, learned it. Also, be candid, there was less family involvement on that side, so I didn't have to do the hurdles, as much on that side as I do in the restaurant. Right. But my focus from an organization perspective is building Sylvia was Incorporated up to be a fully functioning corporate entity, and from that point, I could run the restaurant in a really objective manner. Got you. That's my goal. Got you. How many generations are working in the business now? Four. 4 generations? Yeah, 4th generation. Yeah, little cousins, got a few of them who are great grandchildren, hosting right now because they're out of school, summertime. Yeah. Right. So, we got about 4 minutes before we wind down. So, give people an idea of when that restaurant is cranking at its peak, which from my experience, at one point I think Thanksgiving was like the busiest day of the year, in terms of Mother's Day, Thanksgiving, Valentine's Day. I mean the magnitude of customers, right? That you. We're, clearly it's a little different now, but as we ramp back up and we see restaurants coming back, do you have any numbers, any statistics you can share in terms of the number of customers served per week and the number of servers that you may have on a busy day, just so that people can really understand, like, when this restaurant is busy, again, I'm telling you, I've been in a lot of restaurants, but when this thing was busy, you can literally feel almost like the walls shaking and the building shaking, and it's phenomenal. It's a wonderful thing to see with the counter and how people like to sit at that counter and the tradition and the history behind that counter and what it means to people in Harlem and the family. And on all of that, so just give people an understanding of really what that means and how that works. Yeah, it's pretty amazing because the best parts of the restaurant is is when it's fully maxed out, because that's when you're hitting those efficiencies and you see the machine just like working. So to give context, at the restaurant at its busiest, you might be seating 200 people. Let's say you just open the restaurant at let's say 10 or 11 o'clock on a Sunday. Line outside in the main restaurant, the 3 dining rooms. Shoot, that's not even including the patio. Mm-hmm. So I was about to say 200. you might see 200 people in the 3 dining rooms. You can see another 50 people on the patio,
Right.
and then the counter packed. And this is not even including takeout and delivery.
Right.
And then you could also be having parties going on in Sylvia's also, which is our adjacent property, which we do, overflow and banquets.
Yeah.
You could have another 140 people in there.
Yeah.
So at the same time, you got 450 people in the restaurant at the same time eating.
Right.
And then a line out the door doing takeout all at the same time. And I'm talking from before the restaurant opened and my grandmother's a big proponent. Like, if we're supposed to close at 8 o'clock on Sunday, but if you pull up at 8:05, if she's there,
right,
we still got food. let's keep going. So so we when we're rocking, you're talking about you're doing 450 colors at a time.
And you turning that over, right? So you
turning it over.
You might get to a point where you're feeding 800 to 1,000 people between 11 a.m. and 9 p.m. Right?
Exactly.
That's like you talking incredible numbers. And on the flip side of that, I want to give kudos to the Woods family, because over those 60 years, they have employed Black and brown people who may not have been able to get employment other places, right? Downtown. So now you're talking about, as you heard Sean say earlier, at the peak, you had 117 when the COVID hit, had 117 people, families that were providing home, paying bills and rent and food and feeding their families. So again, you're talking about a community institution that is employing hundreds of people, that is feeding hundreds of people. I know that when I was deeply involved at Sylvia's, that if a homeless person or somebody came in and said they were hungry, like it's Sean correct, like it's the policy to give them something to eat. Right, you want to, take a little diet, and you just had the community breakfast where you feed everybody on your anniversary, 200-300 meals. So let's talk about the advocacy part as we wind down. That that your grandmother and your grandfather created, that your father continued, and Van and Bedelia and Crozette. We got to give shout outs to those. I don't want to get into mentioning all the family members, because if you don't mention somebody else, you're going to forget somebody. But I got to say, Van Woods, because I actually met Van first. And then I met your mother and your grandmother, and then Kenny, Bedelia, and Crozette, which, I feel like I'm family too, but I'm one of probably 8,000 people feel like they're part of the Woods family. But I wouldn't be doing this show justice if we really didn't talk about the advocacy part of not only just who your grandmother was, but who your father and your aunts and uncles are, and then more importantly, who as you going forward with the next generation, about how they took care of people, how you guys take care of people and employ them and feed them. Go ahead.
Yeah, some companies create like whole little pieces of organizations to focus on like community programming, things of that sort. So thinking back, a lot of the things that grandma would do, that's just who she was.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way her mother was. I didn't get the opportunity to meet my great grandmother, but I grew up hearing stories about her, and how she was literally a mother to several people who weren't her children.
Mm-hmm.
And she would literally, if they didn't have clothes on their back, if they didn't have, food on their table, they would eat with her, and they ended up just considering her their mother. These are some of the people I didn't know, like, oh, this is my aunt so-and-so. Was not my aunt. That's somebody, well, they're my aunt, but, they were adopted by my great-grandmother. So I think those learnings that she had and those examples that she had, it basically manifested itself in the way she operated her business. So heard about the stories in the 70s where, and that's heroin era.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it's like, a drug is associated with every era. But so heroin era, she would, serve, those who were, suffering with addictions before the restaurant would open.
Mm-hmm.
That's just because it's her community. She lived on 131st Street. Like, how could she felt an obligation, especially one, who she was, and then two, she was a big proponent. Each one teach one. In other words, if you can do something to help somebody, why wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
so something as simple as that, it would manifest itself in the way she would give people chances. You know,
Right.
somebody coming in for a job, they say they're looking for an opportunity. She would say, why not give a person a job? You know, if that's something she could do, could teach them,
Right.
of course she's gonna do it. So, you know, now if we consider like, the focus on what recidivism,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
it, to her it was like, to give the young person a chance.
Right.
You know, that's her character. So
Yep.
those things ended up just becoming one of the essence of the restaurant, and it's just how the family does things. Because when you take a step back, somebody comes. I see all this food that goes out these doors. I see the amount of waste. I'm
Mm-hmm.
over here looking at yield and all this shit. So excuse my language.
Nice.
Um, yeah, but if somebody comes and saying they're hungry, how can I not give this person a piece of chicken,
Right.
some rice, some macaroni? Like,
Right.
how can, like I feel that obligation just because it's something as simple as, can I do it?
Right.
Is it beneficial? Does it hurt me?
Right.
Like that, I mean, that line of thinking, yeah, I have to, we have to. So, you know, it's something that, I really do appreciate that the restaurant is still known for that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and during COVID, us having like the pantry out of all souls,
Mm-hmm.
giving people groceries, and the food companies able to help with that, some of the products. And, we're packaging, making plates out the restaurant, and people are like, putting a highlight on it, saying like, "Oh wow, it's so great that you guys are, choosing to give in a time of need for the restaurant and a struggling time for the restaurant." But the fact of the matter is like that's just what the restaurant's been about. That's
That's
what
you.
my grandparents were about,
Yep.
and that's something that has continued to show itself through and through. When the need gets greater, the giving tends to increase too. So
Absolutely.
it's something that still proud of, and
Yep.
glad that it's a part of the reputation of the business.
Yep. Yep. Which
And
I
the
think is
family.
a fitting end to, clearly this has been a phenomenal, episode. So I want to thank you for coming on. And I know you got, one last thing is employees. I think you got some employees. Has Olga been there like 40 years, 41 years? Is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep. Olga's been there 40, 41, and Jeanette will be the second most tenured. Jeanette, I think Jeanette was in my first birthday picture, right there when the Carolina room was the tropical room. So Jeanette has to be about 35 years,
35 years. So,
34.
again,
Yeah,
again, the message the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, you're talking about the fact that they've been around for 60 years and they got employees that have been there for 40 of those 60. And the
yeah,
impact that they have on the community and the giving back and the, just the warm-hearted nature of the entire family. So
yeah.
I thought this is a great fitting end to what has been a phenomenal show.
I
Sean,
appreciate
I'm
that.
proud of you, brother. I love you. I love the family. And I want to thank you for coming on the show. Let's give Sean a round of applause. Sean Woods, President, CEO of SWI, Sylvia Woods, Inc., which includes, again, the product line in the restaurants. So,
And some real estate too. Don't forget about that. That supplemental piece.
absolutely, and a lot of real estate,
Yeah.
very valuable real estate, and that is
Yeah.
100% lock, stock, and barrel owned by the
By the
Woods
Woods family.
family.
Yep. That's
Bing,
it.
exactly. Drop the mic on that one.
There
So,
we go.
thank you for attending another episode. I want to thank our sponsors, Eat Okra. If you have not already done so, please download the Eat Okra app. Eat Okra is the go-to app for all things black restaurants across the country. So, my name is Jason Wallace. I am the restaurant scientist. Thank you for tuning in. And until we meet again, power to the people.